You're watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Welcome into the Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network. EJ Hradek here, and excited to be joined by my friend. I like to think I call him my friend, Neil Smith, the former general manager of the New York Rangers, Stanley Cup, the only man to bring home a Stanley Cup for the New York Rangers between the years 1941 and the present, and 1994, as we all remember. Mark Messier and the New York Rangers won the Stanley Cup, and Neil obviously brought Mark Messier there. That was obviously a big, big acquisition. So, Neil, it's good to talk to you, and I know that you've delved into the podcast business. I'll give the listeners, the viewers here, a little bit of a taste of what you're doing now with that, so they can check you out.
Yeah, we do NHL wraparound. Me and Vic Morin, another one of your friends from the past from ESPN, a producer, and we have a lot of fun with it. We do it 3 or 4 times a week, 5 times a week, maybe during the regular season and playoffs. We're not doing too much right now, but we are going to do. This will be interesting, EJ, and I'll give you a tip on this. We're going to do some celebrity shows where people like Liam Neeson or Dennis Leary or others that we've known from other walks of life will come on and talk about their life and if they've had any hockey in their life, like Dennis Leary has. Yeah, that'll be fun to do. And then we're going to get some players on this year. So, EJ, we're having a blast with it. You were kind enough to come on it. And by the way, I count us as good friends, not just friends, good friends.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much. I feel good. I'm glad to hear that. You're a Toronto native, and you obviously had success coming to, you were with the Detroit Red Wings organization. I think you started doing stuff with the Islanders way back when when it first started. Then you went to the Rangers. You win the Stanley Cup there. But you're a Toronto native, so let's start with what's going on with the Leafs in the present, because they just lose Mitch Marner. It was a sign and trade. He was going to leave anyway. He goes to the Vegas Golden Knights. They get Nick Waugh back, who I think will be a helpful piece for them. They added Matthias Michelli from the Utah Mammoth as kind of hopefully a helpful piece on the power play for them. What do you make of where the Leafs are at right now with the departure of a really big piece in Mitch Marner?
Well, it's interesting because of all the things that the Toronto fans go crazy about, the one thing that they sort of missed along the way was the fact that they didn't get Marner signed before Marner got total control of the situation. Once his no trade kicked in and they got into that part and he could turn down being traded anywhere, they're stuck. Now he says, well, I won't let you trade me. And guess what? I'm leaving at the end of the year. He doesn't say that, but everybody knew that. I thought handled very poorly by the Leafs, because in this day and age, you can't lose an asset like Mitch Marner. Okay. And to get Waugh back is a good usable piece, no doubt. But that's only because Vegas had to do something to cover up the fact they'd been talking to him for months. Yeah. And so, you know what? I think where the Leafs are right now without Marner is they're not as good, but they're different. I think they're going to be a different team. I really like the way that the coach is handling the team since he's gotten in there. I think that Berube has given them a lot more structure, told them that they need to concentrate on more than just getting the next goal in the game, which is where they were at when Sheldon was there. Not Sheldon's fault, but Sheldon Keefe did a good job, but they were a different style team. I think Berube demands that they play that other part of the game, the grittier part of the game, the part that not a lot of stars want to play. And I think you saw that with Austin Matthews and others playing it last year. I was telling somebody not long ago that there's about 29 to 30 cities in the league that would love to have the Toronto Maple Leafs player personnel. So Leaf fans, you think you got it bad? I mean, you got a great team. You haven't found the right exact combination to get that Stanley Cup that I saw raised by George Armstrong in 1967. But they got a really good team in Toronto.
Yeah, you know what is interesting, Neil, because like this last, the Matthews era, let's call it, right? They've had these just unfortunate losses in the postseason. I mean, it's just the way it is, and you went to the Rangers in an era when the Rangers went through that, right? Like you got there, and I think they had one season where they had a bad playoff loss. The next year they missed the playoffs, but then in 94, you guys win it all. But history is a lot sometimes to overcome in a marketplace. And like this was a really good year for the Leafs. They won the division, which they hadn't done in a long time. They took the Florida Panthers to 7 games. They had the lead in the series. I mean, if they could have won that game 3, it might have been different. I mean, this was a good team, one of the very best teams in the league this year. But at the end of the year, Shanahan's gone, Marner's gone, and they're still trying to put things together. So it's just, I guess, I mean, I would ask you, because you grew up in that market, it's just difficult there because of the history and because of the fact that this team just hasn't gotten over the hump, and fans are frustrated, and apparently the ownership and management is frustrated too.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot, EJ, of New York and the New York era that I walked into and didn't even realize what I was walking into. But it almost becomes the bad news bears at a point. I was growing up during the Harold Ballard years when the team was just pitiful and they were bad every year and they were missing the playoffs. And then you got the Cliff Fletcher years, which brought back respectability. And then you went into the Pat Quinn years, which also had respectability, and Ken Dryden and Mike Smith and others that walked through that era. But I got to tell you, I think that the Brendan Shanahan era, and I'm going to defend him for a minute, I think that's been almost their best era. And I've seen them all, right? You'd have to go back to Stafford Smythe to get a better era, and that's when they won the Cup in the 60s, but that was a 16 league. I think Brendan Shanahan did a terrific job with the Toronto Maple Leafs, bringing back the alumni, integrating them into the cause, changing the uniforms to reflect the older uniform, the traditional uniform, the way they go about game presentation, everything. And the money, as you know, is hand over fist for MLSE with the Toronto Maple Leafs. All that said and done, they still decide, well, Shanaplan has taken too long, so let's get rid of him. Let's bring in Keith Pelly from television and let him run it. And we'll see what happens from here, because I've seen this with the Rangers. This is what they did. And they did it for a long time, and did it before me, and they did it after me. I was lucky that I got in there at a time in the mid-'90s that you were just talking about, when they left me alone, and they didn't go with every year having to change something and put a head on a pole, as I always say in Toronto, they need to do. So we'll see where this goes, but I do want to say that I think that Brendan Shanahan, in his role as president, head of the business operation, not head of the hockey department, I thought he did a terrific job.
Yeah, Neil, I would agree with you, except I would take issue on one thing, and I'd love to get your opinion about this. Is they went with, it's Toronto Maple Leafs now. This is not like the Anaheim Ducks or the Utah Mammoth, or this is the Toronto Maple Leafs, a marquee franchise. And they turned it over to Kyle Dubas, who had almost no experience, and they turned it over to Sheldon Keefe as the head coach, who had never coached in the National Hockey League before. Like, for me, that's an area that I look at and say, boy, I would have rather seen maybe a more experienced hand there. They had Lou Lamoriello there for 3 years. It seemed like they were building. That's where I would take issue with it as it's turned out. Now, it's easy to sit here, 8-10 years later and say that. But to me, when I look at those type of franchises who could hire literally anyone to do the job, I mean, they have the wherewithal. You said it, hand over fist. They could hire literally anyone to be the manager, to be the coach. That to me was a misstep, because it was younger guys learning on the job, and I think that set them back.
I agree with you, and I think that where the mistake came was that they had Mike Babcock on that huge contract. Remember, he was the first big money coach. Brendan took over. He decided to bring in Lou, which was a good move, because Lou, puts some structure into the organization. And even though Lou's rules are wacky for 2025, they at least brought some structure. Then Brendan decides that from what I understand, and I didn't talk to him about this, that, Lou's rules is too hard on the players, and he can't have it that buttoned down, or else he'll lose guys like Marner and Matthews and others because they won't want to stick around for no facial hair and no high numbers and no pictures on desks and nobody answering the phone after the third ring and on and on and on. So he then decides, because I think that Kyle Dubas had some chance to maybe go someplace else. Yeah. And he was your up and coming Billy Bean of hockey. He's the analytics guy. And I think Brendan made a mistake giving him that job. I don't think he was qualified, and I don't think he's qualified now where he is in Pittsburgh. So I don't. I don't. And so I think that was a mistake. And then wasn't it true? Correct me on this one. Didn't Sheldon Keefe work with Kyle in Sault Ste. Marie?
They were. I think they had worked together at Sault Ste. Marie, and I think then they moved on and worked, in the minor league team. So, and they had won at the minor league level. So, which is obviously a lot different than winning at the National Hockey League level. Right.
And so then I think that's why the switch went from Babcock to Sheldon Keefe. And to just say something positive about Sheldon, I thought Sheldon Keefe, his body of work was 100-point seasons. His body of work was pretty good. Now, was he the best guy at that moment that they could get? they could afford to get today's Scotty Bowman. Today's whoever, Joel Kenville of the old days. So, I would agree with you. I think that those two things, maybe not as much the Keefe issue. I thought Keefe was okay, but definitely the Kyle Dubas thing. And then the way that the Kyle Dubas thing ended with Dubas saying he wasn't sure if there was some wording where he wasn't sure if he should be the manager of the Leafs or something like this. And it was not good. So
it ended in an
I agree
odd
with
manner
you.
with him almost immediately going to the Pittsburgh Penguins, which kind of gives us the thinking that maybe that was already,
maybe that was his thinking. Yeah, maybe he knew that there might be something else out there for him. And then I got to tell you that the other one that I was surprised at, and not that he's doing a bad job, or not that he was, that they, Brad Treliving gets fired in Calgary, and probably was forced to make one of the worst deals in the last decade by trading away Tkachuk and getting Huberdeau. And I said made to do that because I think that Tkachuk had a lot of leverage to go to Florida. But still, he was the guy. I've been that guy, and, you're that guy.
He also traded Sam Bennett, I believe, away.
And yet he's rewarded with the castle, the biggest job in hockey, which is the Toronto Maple Leafs. So I found that peculiar. That ended up being it. I'm not saying he's doing a bad job either. I'm not. And I like Brad, and I think he's an accomplished manager. But I found it strange that again, like you said, the Toronto Maple Leafs, the biggest franchise, the richest franchise, and the franchise that's probably worth the most on the open market if they went to sell it, which they never will. But if they did, how many billions would they get for the Toronto Maple Leafs? So, I agree with you, EJ, and find it sort of perplexing.
Hey, I want to ask you, we're talking about managers, and you did the job and you won the Stanley Cup. So, I want to ask you, what do you think of what Bill Zito has done in Florida? Now, he was an agent, and then he went and became an assistant manager in Columbus. He got the Florida job, and without a lot of hoopla. The Florida Panthers were not he wasn't a huge name at the time. And the Florida Panthers were, they had some good players there. He walked into Barkov and Ekblad, and I believe they had already signed Bobrovsky. So he had some pieces for sure. But what do you think about the job he's done there? Because it seemed like he has been very willing to do what's necessary. At times when people would think they got Tkachuk, but they had to trade Huberdeau and Uyghur, who were some big pieces. He fired his coach after the coach did a really good job, and Andrew Burnett, at least in terms of getting to the playoffs. Yep. I happen to agree with that decision, but he's been bold. What do you make of what he's done? Because you've been in that spot. It's not easy to make. It's easy on the outside for us to talk about it. It's another thing to be the guy having to make that decision.
Well, I think First of all, he's done a tremendous job, like just outlandishly good. And when I watch him or watch his moves and see his moves, he has the balls to do things that you got to do and not worry about his own skin. And that's the biggest deal with a manager is, are you going to do what you have to do, even though you're putting your job on the line at times? And I'm sure there's been times when he's put his job on line. I'll give you one for sure that I know, hiring Paul Maurice, which was criticized all over the place. Why would you bring in this? You're better to watch paint dry on the wall than watch Paul Maurice's teams. That's what was being said about this guy. Well, guess what? Now he's being talked about with Scotty Bowman and all the great coaches of the National Hockey League. But Bill Zito made that decision. And like you said, he didn't bring back Andrew Brunette, who had been the assistant coach to Joel Kenville when Joel Kenville was forced to resign. And that's how Andrew Brunette got it. And then but then Bill Zito did other moves that are just, I mean, he's been hitting the ball out of the park on almost every move. I can't even think of one where he's struck out. Forsling on waivers and, Reinhardt from Buffalo and being able to re-sign Reinhardt after last year's Stanley Cup. Then this year, Marchand comes in and you could say, and I might have said it myself, well, are you sure this is going to work? Because are you going to have too much with Tkachuk and Bennett and Marchand? Like, are you going to be in the penalty box all night during the playoffs? And Marchand's slow. He got a lot slower, hasn't he? Like, is this really going to work? Well, guess what? The third line was better than everybody else's first line, right? So he hit a home run on that one. And he loses Ekman Larson and loses Montour, two real important staples on defense for the first cup, and is able to get Seth Jones out of Chicago, who was disgruntled and wanted to leave, but still, he was able to pull that trigger. We know that Seth Jones wanted out, and who wouldn't want to go to Florida? But EJ, to expand on that, he took a chance on something, because how many times have you seen a player be a really good player? And Seth Jones was a high pick in the entry draft, went to Nashville, did a good job, went to Columbus, was a good player. Two bad teams, though. Goes to Chicago, good player, pitiful team. Okay. Can he be a good player on a good team? That's my question. Can Seth Jones? Well, guess what? He ended up being 1B behind Ekblad, right?
Yeah.
If Ekblad's 1A, he's 1B. He was right there with him.
Yeah.
And that was another tremendous move by him. And then I think also whatever he's feeding Bobrovsky to make him go into that movie Cocoon.
Yeah.
The movie Cocoon where you become younger somehow.
Yeah.
That's what Bobrovsky's done, because at the beginning of his Florida tenure, people were screaming, why did we do this?
Yeah, it's so right, Neil, right? I mean, people forget that now.
Yeah, and now he's God, at which he should be. He's won 2 Stanley Cups for the lowly Panthers, who we never, we rarely saw in the playoffs during most of the time.
Yep.
And now they're the force of the league. So Bill Zito, my hat comes off to him. When they hired him out of Columbus, one could say, well, I guess Bill Zito found out how to win the cup by being with the Blue Jackets. Like, is that what you think you got here? You got the Blue Jackets formula for winning the cup, right? You would think that, right? He comes out of but tremendous job.
How do you think I mean, everybody has a different path to these jobs, seemingly, right? I mean, like going from being an agent and then getting on the team side. Do you think that's helped him at all?
I think so. I mean, Kent Hughes is doing it in Montreal, going from an agent right straight to GM, but he's also got Jeff Gorton with him, helping him there. So, I think him going and learning the ropes from a team perspective had to have helped him, had to have made him understand, the league a little bit better from the management side. And then now going into Florida and coming up all aces has been terrific.
Neil, I mentioned it as, you are a Toronto kid and you grew up watching the Leafs and, you went on to obviously your signature moment in your career being the general manager of the Rangers. And I like to always I'll point it out for the second time, the only man to bring a Stanley Cup to the New York Rangers in what is now, I guess, 90 years or something like that.
85
years. So that is something very, very special. But I know there was a point in time, I can remember that you were in the mix for the Leafs manager's job. I think that year it went to John Ferguson Jr., who was a guy they hired, who was a young guy that really no experience at the time. And I remember thinking that, boy, that would have been such a great opportunity for both the Leafs and for you as a Toronto guy. I mean, what do you remember about that time? Were you close to getting it? And I would think it would have been a dream come true.
Well, I was very close to getting it, and I can tell you, I remember it really well. It was before the lockout. It was 2005, and I was actually, I don't know if you remember this, EJ, but when I say it, you probably will. In 2005, we had a blackout. In about August, we had a blackout all over North America, and I was actually being interviewed at Scotia Air Canada Centre by psychologists on that day, and the computers went off, and everybody up there was like, we were all saying in the room, "What's going on? What's going on?" And then we found out it was everywhere. But anyway, Richard Petty was the guy making the mistakes at that time, and he decided, for whatever reason, to hire John Ferguson Jr., as you said, with no experience, coming out of St. Louis. He was the assistant manager in St. Louis, wasn't from Toronto. His dad, of course, of great fame, great player, manager, coach. But John Ferguson Jr. got the job. I'll tell you this story. Richard Petty called me to tell me they were going to go in a different direction. And I had already been tipped off about this by somebody. And I said, "Yeah, Richard, I know which direction you're going. You're going to hire John Ferguson Jr., but I'm going to tell you something." I swear, EJ, I said this. You know me. I said, "It's not going to work." And he says, "Well, I hope you're wrong." I said, "I'm not going to be wrong. I've been doing this a long time." And I said, "If you really want to win the Stanley Cup, you better start hiring people that have won the Stanley Cup." And I left it at that, and it didn't work. And I don't wish any ill on John Ferguson Jr., and I didn't then either. But it didn't work. And I don't know if Richard Petty wanted to have control. That's why he hired a younger guy with no experience. I don't know what was going on at that time. They also had Pat Quinn, who, remember, they backed him off of being the GM. He was GM coach. And then they said, "You can't be GM anymore." Then they had Ken Dryden mixed into the group as well. So, and Quinn and Dryden didn't like each other at that time. So it was a mixed bag going on back in 2005.
Let me ask you this, deal. Do you think Quinn was maybe wanted a younger guy like Ferguson who he could control more? Because I'm sure that Pat didn't want to give up the GM role. As you pointed out, he was kind of eased off it. Maybe he might have been politicking behind the scenes to have someone that he can control rather than someone like yourself who brought a lot of experience and success to the position.
It might have been. We'll never know. You know, I mean, yeah. Pat and I were friends before that and after that. And when Pat got fired by John Ferguson Jr., I called him like you do with people that say sorry. And I said, "Too bad I didn't get the job, Pat, because you wouldn't have got fired." And I meant that. That wouldn't have happened. And so maybe Pat would rather have had a younger guy, a guy that he might control. Because if you remember, Steve Tambellini's name was in the mix too, because he'd worked with Pat Quinn in Vancouver. And there was some thought there that this is what Pat wanted so that he could keep his control. So who knows? I mean, unfortunately for all of us, Pat's gone now. Yeah. And that was a big loss for hockey.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a big loss for the Leafs to not give you that opportunity. I mean, you never know how things would have worked out, but I think it would have been someone, again, the Toronto Maple Leafs hiring you, a local guy that had won the Stanley Cup in a place where they had not won in many years. Seemed like a pretty easy hire to make for me, but this is why they are still in the wilderness, maybe.
Well, I'll give you even one more step to it, is that when they decided to fire John Ferguson Jr., they'd already tampered with Brian Burke in Anaheim. And it was during the season, in the middle of the season, that they got Berkey to leave Anaheim and come to Toronto. And I don't know how the league allowed it. I mean, I guess because the Samuelis in Anaheim didn't argue it, didn't try to fight it. But then that didn't work out for them either. Because if you know Brian, and we both know Brian well, he would describe himself as bombastic. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. And that doesn't fly too well in the Toronto market. And Bell, the leader of Bell Media that had ownership of MLSE with the Rogers, decided they didn't want a guy in the boardroom that was using the kind of language that Brian was using. So there went Brian Burke. But they never came back to me after all that. They never turned around and said, well, how about the guy that told us we'd be wrong, that was right that we were wrong? Why don't we give him a chance? But they never did. Well,
hey, these are the opportunities and missed opportunities in life. You know, we're both old enough to know, right? There's things happen for different reasons. Who knows why? The good news for you, Neil, is that the New York Rangers were wise to bring you in at the time. And in the end, you delivered that Stanley Cup. And so many people, I grew up in New York, so many people were Ranger fans. And to this day, you know, they've only seen that one cup in most of their lifetimes. And they're very, very thankful that you were there with Messier and Richter and Leach and company to bring that home for them. So we'll never know about the Leafs, but who knows? I mean, you got your name is on the cup. That much we do know.
Yeah. Well, and it's been a lifelong thing, and really, EJ, the notoriety of that Stanley Cup and Neil Smith is grown and grown and grown. It's way more now than it was in 95, 96, 97, right after, where I was just an idiot because the teams weren't good, because we had to rebuild. So now I went from a genius to a moron in like 3 years. But now I've got the genius status back again because they haven't seen me much. And so they just say, who was that guy? And now he must have been a genius to be able to win here. You know, so I don't think I was a genius. I don't think I was a moron. Somewhere in between.
Well, you did it. You did a hell of a job, and you were able to get Messier, and you were able to make the right moves that made things happen. So at the end of the day, it's hard to win. That's it. That's the bottom line. I mean, we've seen good teams and good players and good coaches and good managers. That doesn't happen for them. So you made it happen. So listen, we've taken a lot of your time here today. Want to thank you for stopping by with us. And I always enjoyed talking to you. I could sit here and talk to you for like 5 hours because we've had a lot of. I've watched a lot of the history of your career, and then we've had a lot of time to watch the history of this league. But thanks for the time today, Neil. We appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon.
EJ, talking to you on this show is like we're on the phone together. I don't find it any different. It's just like, this is what we do. We sit and we talk about things, and luckily now we have podcasts where we can be honest and say the honest truth, and which when you're on TV and on NHL Network and doing those things, you got to be careful saying things about people that you really thought. And I haven't been careful here. I've tried to paint it the way I saw it.
Yeah. And listen, for the hockey fans, they really do appreciate that. And you're right. I think it gives you an opportunity to kind of, speak a little bit more freely about things and give your opinion. At the end of the day, it's your opinion. Now, yours is an educated opinion and an experienced opinion. But at the end of the day, we all have our opinions on these things, right or wrong. And like I said earlier about things, it's easy to talk about it after the fact, but it's good fodder for the hockey.
It is, and it's fun. It's fun. What's more fun than talking hockey?
There you go. Well, Neil, enjoy the rest of the summer, my friend. I'm sure I'll talk to you at some point. Take care, and this has been the Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.
Thanks for watching Toronto Sports Rush on the Bet Rivers Network.